Smart people are more biased than you think, and their intelligence makes it worse, not better. Here's what makes that genuinely unsettling. The smarter you are, the better you become at building arguments for what you already believe. Not because you're dishonest, because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. This is history. And today, we're tracing one of the most documented, most studied, and most invisible forces in human cognition: confirmation bias. The bias that doesn't feel like a bias at all. It feels like careful thinking. And that's exactly the problem. In 1960, a British psychologist named Peter Wason ran a deceptively simple experiment. He showed participants 4 cards. Each card had a letter on one side and a number on the other. Then he gave them a rule. If a card has a vowel on one side, it must have an even number on the other. The task was this: which cards do you need to flip to test whether the rule holds? Most people chose E and 4. That seems right. E is a vowel, so you check it. 4 is even, so you check it. The logic feels airtight. But the correct answer is E and 7. Not 4, 7. Because the only way to test a rule is to look for where it might fail, and almost nobody did that. In Wason's original study, only about 4% of participants got it right. Across later replications and variations of the task, the number typically stays below 10% under standard conditions, around 4% in the original. These weren't unintelligent people. They were university students, educated, motivated, and almost all of them tested whether the rule was true, instead of testing whether it could be false. Wason called this the positive test strategy. We seek evidence that confirms what we already suspect. We avoid evidence that might undermine it. And we do this automatically, without noticing, because it feels like exactly the kind of careful thinking we should be doing. Here's the part that almost nobody talks about, and it's the part that matters most. Confirmation bias doesn't feel like laziness. It doesn't feel like wishful thinking. It feels like careful analysis. When you search for evidence that supports your hypothesis, your brain experiences that as testing the hypothesis. The process feels identical from the inside. Wason ran a second experiment the same year. He gave participants a sequence of 3 numbers: 2, 4, 6. He told them the numbers followed a rule. Their job was to discover it. To test their guesses, participants could propose any 3 numbers, and Wason would tell them, "Yes, that fits the rule," or "No, it doesn't." Almost everyone immediately guessed the rule was even numbers increasing by 2. And then they spent the entire experiment confirming it. They'd propose 8, 10, 12, yes. 20, 22, 24, yes. 100, 102, 104, yes. Rule confirmed. The actual rule was just any 3 numbers in ascending order. 1, 2, 3 would have worked. 5, 99, 200 would have worked. 3, 7, 8 would have worked. But almost nobody tried those, because those sequences didn't feel like tests. They felt like abandoning the hypothesis. This is the trap. The positive test strategy makes hypothesis confirming feel like hypothesis testing. You're asking questions. You're gathering evidence. You feel thorough. And the entire time, you're only collecting evidence that can say yes. The 7 card sits there, untouched, decisive, and you never felt the need to flip it. By 1979, researchers wanted to test something harder. Not whether people seek confirming evidence when evidence is scarce, but what happens when you hand them both sides. Charles Lord, Lee Ross, and Mark Lepper recruited participants with strong, opposing views on capital punishment. Half believed it deterred crime, half believed it didn't. Then they gave everyone the same 2 studies. One study appeared to support deterrence, one appeared to undermine it. Both were presented with equal detail, equal rigor, equal clarity. If objectivity were real, if exposure to balanced evidence actually balanced people, both groups should have moved toward the middle. That's not what happened. Both groups became more extreme. The researchers called this biased assimilation. When people encounter mixed evidence, they don't average it. They scrutinize the studies that contradict their view, questioning the sample size, the methodology, the design, while accepting the confirming studies at face value. The same study, rated as excellent by one group, rated as weak by the other, based entirely on whether it confirmed what they already believed. And here's what makes this genuinely disturbing. The participants weren't lying. They weren't being cynical. They genuinely believed their evaluations were objective. They felt like they were applying critical thinking. The more carefully they read, the more entrenched they became. Giving people more evidence from both sides made the polarization worse, not better. That's the mechanism. Confirmation bias doesn't feel like bias. It feels like discernment. And the more intelligent you are, the more convincing your discernment becomes, to yourself and to everyone around you. In 1998, psychologist Raymond Nickerson published a comprehensive review of confirmation bias across decades of research. He examined studies from medicine, law, science, finance, and political judgment. His conclusion was unambiguous. Confirmation bias is one of the most robust and pervasive cognitive biases ever documented. It appears across cultures, across domains, across expertise levels, and critically, expertise did not protect people from the bias. In several domains, it made it worse. Trained professionals showed it. Scientists showed it. Lawyers, doctors, financial analysts, all of them. The surgeon who reviews only the diagnostic results that support the treatment they've already planned. The lawyer who builds a case file by selecting only the precedents that support their argument. The analyst who sees patterns in market data that confirm the trade they want to make. Expertise didn't eliminate the bias. It gave people more sophisticated tools to act on it. And then, in 2017, a research team led by Dan Kahan published findings that clarified exactly how this works. They gave participants a numeracy test, a measure of how well people work with numbers and statistical data. Then, they gave them an identical data set, the same numbers, the same statistics. But they told half the group the data was about a skin cream, and they told the other half it was about gun control policy. When the topic was skin cream, higher numeracy predicted better analysis. Smarter people got closer to the correct answer. When the topic was gun control, the pattern inverted. The most analytically capable participants, the ones who were best at handling numbers, were the most likely to reach the wrong conclusion when the correct answer contradicted their political beliefs. Not because they were less intelligent, because they were more capable of constructing sophisticated justifications for what they already believed. Their analytical skills had been recruited, without their awareness, into the service of motivated reasoning. Smarter people don't resist confirmation bias more. They rationalize it better. And their rationalizations are harder to challenge because they're built from real analytical skill. So why does this happen? Why would a brain that evolved for survival build in a mechanism that distorts reality? One leading explanation from evolutionary psychology proposes that in most ancestral environments, the cost of a false positive was lower than the cost of a false negative. If you believe something that turns out to be wrong, you can correct it later. If you abandon a belief that turns out to be right because you were too aggressive in testing it against disconfirming evidence, you might not survive to correct anything. The positive test strategy on this account isn't a bug. It's a feature that may have worked brilliantly for most of human history in environments where speed mattered more than precision. It's a compelling hypothesis, though evolutionary explanations for specific cognitive biases are difficult to test directly, and researchers continue to debate the precise mechanisms. What's less debatable is what happens next. Because we now live in environments where the costs have flipped entirely. When a doctor misreads a diagnosis because they only tested confirming evidence, that's not caution. That's a missed treatment. When a jury evaluates evidence through the lens of what they already believe, that's not discernment. That's a verdict that was decided before deliberation began. When a scientist designs study after study to confirm rather than challenge their hypothesis, that's not rigor. That's a literature full of results that can't be replicated, and a field that has to spend years cleaning up after itself. The bias that may have kept our ancestors alive is now the bias that polarizes democracies, derails careers, and makes it harder to find truth in the places where truth matters most. The 7 card sits in every courtroom, every clinic, every parliament, and almost nobody flips it. Here's the honest part. There is no cure for confirmation bias. Awareness helps, but only modestly. Research in controlled settings suggests that knowing about the bias doesn't reliably protect you from it. The positive test strategy runs below the level of deliberate thought, faster than your awareness can catch it. What shows promise in controlled settings, though with mixed and inconsistent results and limited evidence of transfer to real-world decisions, is changing the question you ask before you evaluate evidence. Not, does this support my view, but what would change my mind? Not, is there evidence for this? But what would the evidence look like if I were wrong? It's a small move, but it's the move that the vast majority of people don't make spontaneously. And the more emotionally or ideologically invested someone is, the more convincing their rationalizations become, and the harder that move gets to execute. The mind built for survival is not automatically built for truth, and the sharpest minds can cut in the wrong direction, not despite their intelligence, but because of it. This bias reminds us that analytical skill and motivated reasoning are not opposites. They are partners. The stronger the skill, the more convincing the motivation. But confirmation bias leaves a harder question. If our best analytical tools can be recruited to defend our worst conclusions, what does that mean for every institution, every court, every clinic, every parliament, that depends on human judgment to get things right? I'm here to help you know the mind that shapes every judgment. Which would you test first? The Wason 7 card, the Stanford polarization finding, or the Kahan numeracy inversion? And which one do you think is hardest to act on when the stakes are real? See you at the next experiment.